adapt our ideas to what the theme was just now, the new reality. And part of that new reality is what is unfolding in the world and Africa's place in that. The second is that ideas about growth and about development have been evolving, particularly since the financial crisis. And the third thing is that there's an impatience with the current models around issues of job creation, inequality, poverty eradication, and development more generally. So where we're going to now is saying, how do we capture these new trends and turn them into effective programs on the ground in Africa, not spend too much of time talking about them, but spend more time planning, building institutions, developing our capacity, and implementing projects on the ground that demonstrates our own credibility about these issues.
Essentially, what's going to give the impetus to a new approach on growth strategies, on job creation, on this inclusivity that's being emphasized? Because in South Africa, the big issue is to create jobs, but also your administration is saying quality jobs.
Well, there's two things. One is that there are formidable challenges on the horizon. North Africa in some ways demonstrates that for both the developed world and the developing world, that continued unemployment, marginalization of the youth and women, and inequalities in societies are not sustainable. On the other hand, there's a huge set of opportunities, particularly on the African continent and indeed in South Africa as well. Now, how do we combine the two to make sure that we can give effective realization to the kinds of things that we're actually talking about? And those two will create, I hope, and I think they're beginning to, a sense of urgency, both about developing concrete plans and about implementing them.
Obviously, you talk about the new reality, and the new reality is that the poles of power are shifting very much in favor of emerging market economies, which at the moment constitute over 25% of global growth, and it's believed in the next 3 or 4 years over 60% of global growth. South Africa, having just been to China as a bona fide member of Brazil, Russia, India and China, that grouping, how is Africa going to benefit?
No, well, firstly, we're part of a group which has a huge amount of weight that it would carry. Firstly, in terms of the size of the countries. Secondly, in terms of the existing economic weight and future economic weight. And thirdly, it reflects the multipolarity that we speak about. That from South Africa's position, we want to keep our relationships with the established economies that we have been dealing with, but there are a new set of opportunities and relationships that are opening up with a new set of economies which are gaining the kind of dominance that you're actually talking about. There's also a realization amongst those economies, the Russias, Indias, Chinas and Brazil, that Africa has huge potential as a market, as a source of raw materials, as a source of agricultural products being developed, but also as a potential for a new kind of partnership. So the question is, how does Africa reach an understanding with both the BRICS countries, but the developed world as well, that development in Africa has to be different. It has to be on a basis of a win-win partnership, and we need to lay the basis for that.
How do you respond to the skeptics who say that South Africa is punching above its weight? The value of this economy is just a quarter of the size of Russia's economy. Even in terms of demographics and population size, we just have a fraction of the markets that exist in Brazil, Russia, India and China, and that in many ways we don't merit to be a member of BRIC. That's the first thing. But secondly, we're not going to be competitive, and what's going to end up happening is that this economy is open to a flooding of their imports as opposed to us selling South African and African products abroad.
Well, that's the whole question in some ways, because we are already members of BRICS. So let's look ahead. And what we can look ahead to is a new set of relationships, like I said, a new set of opportunities. But let's be very practical and concrete about this. Our friends in BRICS are our friends on the one hand, they are our partners on the one hand, but they're also our competitors as well. And every country in the world is going to compete with the other, including our immediate neighbors. How we reach a constructive mode of competition and cooperation is part of the venture that South Africa is actually entering into. South Africa's contribution to BRICS is to bring an African perspective to the party, to bring the next billion to the party as well. So you have 2 billions there, there's a third one coming along as well. And South Africa can play an important role both for itself, but as a catalyst and as a leverage factor for the rest of Africa as well.
Obviously, issues that were raised at the BRICS summit are a variety of sort of systemic issues that exist in the global economy. Lots of discussions about the dollar as a reserve currency, the fact that you still have huge deficits in the developing or the developed world. That translates into problems in the developing economies rather, and just broader issues about really finding tangible, sustainable partnerships internationally. When you look at the global economic system today and the persistent worries about sovereign debt crises in Southern Europe, the sluggish growth in the United States, the rise of inflation, what's your outlook for the world we're living in?
Well, you've captured it. It's a worrying situation. It's worrying because of the factors that you've mentioned: sovereign debt, inflation, unemployment, sluggish growth, on the one hand. On the other hand, there seems to be an unwillingness to come to terms with the fact that these are important risks that we need to take account of, that we need to demonstrate the same kind of cohesiveness that we demonstrated when the Lehman Brothers saga emerged and the recession began to both strike the developed world and the rest of the globe as well. So those are matters that are preoccupying the G20 and certainly ourselves. And so we live in a world where there are all of these opportunities that are available, but as you correctly pointed out, there are all of these risks as well. And part of the challenge is that we need to get a wider understanding, both within the establishment, business and government sectors, but also amongst our people, that this world requires some radically different answers to many of the challenges that we face.
I mean, other than the fact that we're repositioning South Africa and Africa essentially at WEF, South Africa is also punting and really leading the clarion call, as it were, on issues of the environment, because later on this year, South Africa will be hosting the UN conference on climate change. How does the environment factor or feature into the broader agenda that South Africa has?
Well, it's part of the lead that we're taking, if you like, on issues of inclusive growth, of sustainable growth. And if you remember, the G20 in September 2009 developed the idea of a framework for strong, sustainable and balanced growth. Very much part of that strong, sustainable and balanced growth is the environment component. South Africa also is, we might not be as big as Russia or India or China, but we have a powerful contribution to make to the world about how we reach win-win solutions and how we create positivity out of what appears to be a disastrous situation, pre-1994, post-1994. So we hope that we can make a humble contribution to encouraging the world to look at the reality of the necessity for a legal binding agreement. We might not reach it in South Africa, but if we can take an important step towards that, that's absolutely critical. Our Minister of International Relations has been traveling the world, listening to various voices and what their hopes are about what we can achieve in Durban. And we hope that in Durban, the world will work with South Africa in order to take another important step forward in finding a solution to those crises.
And finally, let me not keep you, Minister. Obviously, you do know we're CNBC Africa, we're markets driven, and investors are concerned about the currency and whether or not it's too strong, and we've had these conversations before. Are you concerned that the South African rand could go below 6 rands?
The real issue right now is about the volatility of the currency, about the continuous capital flows and the volatility of those flows, about the fact that within the G20 we haven't yet found a formula which brings together a set of guidelines, if you like, for sending countries and receiving countries. In our own domestic situation, we have the impact that the strong rand has on the manufacturing sector and parts of the export side, although the recent numbers seem to indicate that there are parts of the manufacturing sector that are doing extremely well from the PMI numbers that we have seen. At the same time, the inflationary price increases in terms of fuel and food are buffered in some ways by the strength of the rand at the moment. So it's a mixed picture. We take whatever positives we can get out of the current situation, but the key is we still need to work towards a situation where we have less volatility and greater certainty for all of us.